Hello, Carl here with Sustainability Theory News. We're over at ecofarmingdaily.com. They have a very informative article on soil restoration, 5 core principles. A lot of great scientific information in here, more than I can cover in this video, so I'll be linking to it in the description. First, I talk about the power of photosynthesis, how it can take CO2 from the air and convert it into a form that's easily uptaken by the microbes that help plants thrive. They talk about how 85 to 90% of all mineral uptake by the plants is aided by the microbes in the soil. And if you use chemical fertilizers, then the plants no longer have to take this carbon dioxide and put it into a liquid form for the microbes, thus starving the microbes out of the soil. And they also talk about how monocultures, or growing one type of plant only, just devoids the soil of all sorts of different microbes, because certain microbes like to interact with certain plants, because certain plants produce certain sugars or enzymes that are beneficial for those microbes. So it all comes down to the plant microbe bridge. And they talk about how mineral depletion has declined in vegetables, but typically most soils have these minerals. They just can't be uptaken by the plants because of the lack of microbes in the soil. So they talk about restoring nutrient density of the soil carbon sink. We talked a little bit about that. We'll talk more about it in this section here. Green is good. They talk about if we can have around 5% increase in global photosynthetic capacity, then it would counteract the effect of the CO2 from the burning of fossil fuels. And since, on average, global cropland is bare for around half the year, a 5% increase in photosynthetic capacity is not a whole lot. It's certainly much easier to achieve than just stopping the burning of fossil fuels overnight, or even within a couple of years. So they talk about different ways to increase the photosynthetic capacity. Grazing management, instead of grazing down to the bare soil, as shown here, which will also allow for a lot of the roots to die off, because if you chop off 50% of the top of the growth, usually 50% of the roots will die as well and rot away. So they talk about if you can see your animal's feet, you've gone too long with grazing. You want to get it so they're about 50% of the forage is still available, and that way it recovers a lot faster. They also talk about crop production and how organic carbon holds between 4 and 20 times its own weight in water. And that is great, because you need to have good water holding capacity in soils. Otherwise, when it's too wet, the soil structure will be all messed up. If it's too dry, the plants won't grow. Again, they talk about why microbes matter, and we already talked a bit about that. They help the soil aggregate up. They help with the soil structure. 20 to 60% of the carbon is fixed in the green leaves, but then it's channeled to the soil mycelial networks, which are the networks of beneficial bacteria and fungi in the soil. Diversity is indispensable. Again, different plants produce different chemicals, thus propagating different types of microbes. They talk about hundreds of species were found in the native prairies and meadows, but now about 70 species can be used on soil restoration, and after 2 years of this diverse life on the soil, farmers have seen huge improvements. And they also talk about combining or companion planting with even major grain crops. With peas with canola, for example, and peas are a legume. Clover or lentils with wheat. Again, clover and most lentils are, of course, legume, fixing nitrogen from the atmosphere into the soil. Soybean or vetch with corn. Buckwheat and or peas with potatoes. Companion planting can be a great way to help the soil thrive. It can also help repel certain bugs. Look into integrated pest management or permaculture plant guilds if you're interested more on that topic. But they also talk about how, in this section, limited chemical use. Only about 10 to 40% of non-organic nitrogen fertilizers uptaken by the plants, with 60 to 90% gone. And they also talk about how we usually think of nitrogen either coming from legumes or from fertilizer sources, but legumes aren't the only plants that have beneficial relationships with bacteria, because it is the bacteria in legumes, the bacteria in the soil rather, that takes nitrogen from the atmosphere and fixates it into a form that can be easily uptaken by the plant's roots. But they talk about how lots of plants have beneficial relationships with microbes to absorb not only nitrogen but several other vital nutrients. But again, if you just pour all sorts of fertilizer on the ground, it prevents the plants from producing the chemicals needed to create beneficial soil microbe relationships because they're getting all the nutrients they need, or at least the basic nutrients they need to grow. Lastly, they talk about avoid aggressive tillage for several reasons. One, you expose the soil or bare soil to the sun, to the wind. It can damage the life in the soil. It can also damage the structure of the soil. If you have a clay-filled soil and you start rototilling, it can create a hard pan very fast, especially if the soil is really, really wet. But even in sandy soils, you can create a hard pan if there's enough clay in there to do so. So there's a lot more information that I didn't cover in this extensive article. If you'd like to read more about it, the link will be in the description. And if you'd like to see more news headlines like this, subscribe to my channel. Have a great day.